Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to catch up with the recent flurry of interesting news concerning the next referendum for Scottish independence, as the Scottish Government announced a rough landing zone of autumn 2023. And I'll be discussing the issues from both the point of view of the independence campaign, but also in terms of how we might be able to avoid having it feature strongly in the next UK general election, which I would like to avoid. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So given the nature of this topic and that I only discuss it as and when there are significant things to discuss, which means that in a few more weeks there may be something else. Usual disclaimer here. So I don't think Scottish independence would be a good idea for anyone, but I do defend the right of people in Scotland to decide, and that they should be able to decide free from direct interference from outside, which includes Westminster. I also think there's a clear mandate to have a referendum next year. Not just because there's a clear majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament for the referendum, but because the last one in 2014 was invalidated by David Cameron. I do think that if you implemented a proper constitutional settlement for this issue, which there isn't, bear in mind, there is for Northern Ireland, there's not for Scotland, but if you did, then yes, you would say there has to be a significant period of time between these referenda. It doesn't help political focus to keep having these things hanging over your head. So the once in a generation tag from 2014 is generally reasonable, but it's not a matter of law. It's just something politicians said that had no power in law. In addition, David Cameron made part of his Remain campaign the argument that Scotland within the UK would be part of one of the top 3 most powerful EU members. They would not enjoy the same influence as a separate EU member. It's true enough. But the following year, David Cameron then backed a referendum into leaving the EU. We've now left. And I don't care what any other politician said at the time. If you're not in power, what you say can never be a promise. It's like in the Brexit referendum, people, Nigel Farage saying, oh, we'd do this and we'd do that. So it's not up to you, is it? Only those in power, or who might enter power, can make political promises. David Cameron was Prime Minister at the time of both referenda, so there's no doubt at all that there should be another one. From my point of view, I'd like it to be as soon as possible. I'd have preferred this autumn, being honest. I also wonder if the SNP might not be risking things a little bit by delaying it until next year. I know at the moment, if you look at the polls, it's like, oh, it's leaking away a little bit and they want to shore up support again. But a few things could change for next year, couldn't they? But anyway, I'll leave that for a future video. I'll go over my main political interest towards the end. But first things first, the legal situation. So what is the legal force of the referendum going to be? Because for the longest time, I've tried to argue, well, it should really be for Holyrood to issue a legally binding referendum under certain conditions. You know, people argue that Westminster has to give permission, and it may be true, it's probably likely to be true, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not been tested in court. You know, and it's like the Scotland Act, there might be, there's bound to be a few wrinkles in the Scotland Act that haven't been tested in court yet, and you know, it might, I mean, at the end of the day, this is the right to exercise self-determination, isn't it? And I know about the Section 30 orders, and for those who don't know, so technically part of the Scotland Act says, if the Scottish Government or the Scottish Parliament want to implement something that has an impact on the UK Constitution, that Westminster have to give its approval. And, I mean, yes, this would affect the UK Constitution in a sense, but it's fundamentally self-determination, isn't it? Now, I don't like to go too much into the historical chicanery because then people start coming up with comments which start talking a load of bollocks. But Scotland entered the Union freely, so why shouldn't it be able to leave so? I mean, imagine how the Brexiteers would be frothing if it had turned out that we couldn't have had a referendum to leave the EU without the EU Parliament giving us their blessing first. But there are other examples that have the opposite effect, like the United States of America, for example. It's not unlike the UK in some respects. And individual states there are not permitted to vote to leave. But that arrangement has never really sat right with me. But it does highlight the fact that the issue is not legally straightforward. So again, the sooner these plans come out, the sooner they can be tested in court and the sooner we can have a clear legal footing. The political arguments, of course, are political arguments, so they can rage and rage and rage. But as far as I'm concerned, I want the issue legally settled. And I did see reports saying that the Scottish Government's legal advice has been that the Scottish Parliament can't just issue a referendum and have it legally binding. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, insists that she does have a legal route towards this referendum next autumn, as in autumn 2023, without the need for Westminster's approval. She said that the referendum will be going ahead in autumn 2023. They're going to launch a public consultation, which is always political speak for we want people to support this thing, but you know. So it's going to cover various issues around the notion of independence. Ian Blackford plugged it in Westminster last Wednesday. The problem is that Sturgeon is not explaining just yet what her intentions are. Now, she is supposed to be doing so quite soon. You know, and I'd like to think the delay, because it's been a hell of a delay. I know that they've said we're trying to wait for COVID to sort of be under control. And okay, fair enough. But at the same time, that didn't stop the planning, did it? So it's the announcing the plans has been delayed quite a long time, which suggests to me some convolution. You can argue that there'll be some politics to it, because bear in mind, you know, the SNP doesn't have quite a majority in the Scottish Parliament, but it formed an alliance with the Scottish Greens, who are also in favour of referendum. So together they have their majority, but it does mean you've got negotiations between two parties on exactly how to present this plan. So maybe there's just some politics involved. And it is possible that they're clear on their legal position. But for the sake of both sides, I do hope that full plan is published soon. I know I've seen reports saying in the next few weeks that suggests before the summer recess. Good, I hope so. Because I do hope they're not going to try and delay it as much as possible to blindside opponents, because then it risks getting incredibly messy. Because whatever this plan is, and there's every chance that it will be at best a non-binding referendum, I suppose that's most likely, then it will need to allow time for full legal challenges still. Like each case brought against the plan would be heard in the Court of Session first, which is Scotland's constitutional court, and then in the Supreme Court for any appeals. We saw this in 2019 with Johnson's illegal prorogation of Westminster, but there could be multiple challenges. There'll be various groups with an interest in this. They may all have different arguments and may want to bring their own cases. Doesn't mean the courts will be bombarded with dozens of cases, because any case that comes before them, if they decide it's not materially different to another one they've already heard, then they'll say, right, we've already done this, go away. You know, they'll only need to hear genuinely different arguments. You know, so if one's too similar, that's it, it'll be gone. But until the SNP and Greens have published this plan, we're not going to know exactly what has been planned for next year. It's like they've announced, there's going to be a referendum autumn 2023. Okay, what on? Could be anything. Obviously, the consultation will be about getting people's minds focused on the matter, putting various arguments across. So it will start to now be interesting to track polls as the process takes place. It's a little bit like polls for a general election. They can go they're always very interesting, of course, but at the same time, people's minds sharpen when it's going to become a reality. So when a general election has been announced, all of a sudden, then the polls start to move. Same thing here, you know, so over the next year and a few months, assuming this plan is robust, then it will start to focus people's minds. In terms of the British politics outside of Scotland, I am disappointed, as I say, that the plan's been delayed so long, but 2023 isn't a bad time for my politics. The fact that it's late 2023 is a little bit more disappointing, but it's not bad, because in 2015, which was a year after the last Scottish referendum, the Conservatives ran a successful general election campaign partly based on the notion that voting for Labour was likely to result in an SNP Labour coalition, and Ed Miliband at the time would be in the SNP's pocket. And it's naturally, this wouldn't have occurred, and anyone who understands the politics in Scotland would realise that, but the Tories aren't appealing to people who understand that. So it worked quite well. Now, I'm not saying it was the only factor in Cameron's win, but it was a ploy that hit home. It worked so well, they kept doing it. They've been doing it ever since. They've started doing it again. The Daily Mail had on their front page a week or two ago this notion that, if you vote for Labour, you're just going to end up with a Labour SNP coalition, and then Labour will be dancing to the SNP's tune. But the ploy may be less likely to work this time. Not only will the Conservatives have been in power for so long and the economy's so buggered that people will just go, you know what, at this point we don't care. But Starmer is not seen as a weak leader according to the polls. Yes, he's not seen as a strong leader either. People are a bit unsure. But his promise to resign if fined over Beergate did him some good in those stakes, according to polls. Ironically, the Daily Mail may have actually helped Starmer combat this notion that he would give in to various demands from the SNP that voters in England would not be happy with. But as much as it's possible that this ploy may not work at the next election, I'd rather not have it put to the test, in all honesty. A few weeks ago, some people asked me if Labour should... It was a week or two. It was when the Daily Mail started pushing this thing. And they were asking me, shouldn't Labour now start to work on their defence against this? Nip it in the bud. And I said, not yet. Don't worry about it yet. Because it might not even be an issue. Because if Sturgeon not only does know what she's doing, but publishes with enough time for genuine legal and political debate over her plan, and it's all sorted and the path is laid clear for this referendum, autumn 2023, then the SNP may solve Labour's problem for them. Because if some form of referendum takes place, even if it's just indicative, the problem can disappear. Because if the majority vote to remain in the UK, the problem will absolutely disappear up its own arsehole. And for those who are convinced that this will not be how the vote goes, do not be so sure. Right now, polling suggests actually that support for independence is waning. Sure, it tends to go up and down, and it will be the job of the SNP to try and make sure it peaks in time for the referendum, just as the Brexiteers did for the Brexit referendum. But my main concern is how seriously people in Scotland will take the referendum. See, my preference is for a legally binding poll, not just from a moral point of view, for political as well. Because if it's not, I do worry that a lot of people go, well, does this referendum actually change anything? Not really, no, it's indicative. Oh, I can't be arsed then. You know, so if they think the result won't matter. That would leave a disproportionate number of people voting who represent the strongest views. Now, I don't know if that means more people in favour or against independence, by the way. But it's never a good thing for the extremes to make up a disproportionate number of voters, because then you end up with Brexit. So my hope is that the referendum is taken seriously and gets a high turnout, like a very high turnout. If most people vote to remain, the issue is finished for a good long time, and Labour needn't worry about the issue at all. If the vote is to leave, then Labour will need a policy, but that would still be preferable to having the referendum hanging over them by the next general election, which is still more likely to take place in January 2025. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.